Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Connecting Conversation here in our discussion board. This week, we are joined by Megan, who works at the Community Foundation of North Central Massachusetts. Megan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of what your career path has been and how you've ended up in the position you're in now?
Sure. Hi, I'm Megan Masico. I'm the Director of Grants and Impact at the Community Foundation. I took a very long and winding road to get here. I spent the majority of my career, almost 20 years, in the corporate world. I did underwriting, community relations, project management, market development. But the job that I enjoyed the most was community relations, and part of that role was grant making. I also volunteered at the United Way of Central Mass on their community impact review team for 17 years, and I loved that. And so when the opportunity arose here at the Community Foundation to do grant making full time and get paid for it, I jumped at the opportunity.
Awesome. And just to backtrack so I can make sure students understand on the language, can you tell us really briefly what is underwriting?
Sure. Underwriting is, at the time I was working for Unum, and I worked, it's an insurance company, and I worked in the individual disability insurance area. And so basically, I was looking at applications for insurance and looking at their medical history to see what kind of risks they were and if we wanted to approve their application or we could also make modifications. So, for example, if somebody has had years and years of back pain, I could approve their application but exclude any back related claims that they might have in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so with a little bit of your background under their belts, can you talk a little bit about specifically what is the Community Foundation of North Central Massachusetts in terms of what are your focus areas, how you all decide them, and then I'll ask some follow-up questions from there.
Sure. So here at the Community Foundation, we have two different types of grant making. We have fund holders that manage their own DAFs, which are uh, donor advised funds. So they donate their funds to us, we manage their funds, and they send requests to us so that they can direct grants in the way that they see fit. Another way that we do grant making is through field of interest funds. And so those are our discretionary grant making funds. So we've had fund holders in the past that have set up these endowed funds, which means they live on in perpetuity. And it is turned over to me, and we have review teams and ultimately the board of directors to determine who to award those funds to. So we have a spending policy that basically says we can only spend about 4.5% of the total balance of the fund each year. That's how we make sure that the funds last forever and ever.
Mhm.
And so the way that we go about doing it, our basic grant process is we basically send out an RFP, a request for proposals,
Mhm.
and we put in funding guidance that is determined by our review committee. So we'll set priorities each year. And then we send out the message that the RFP is open and we start gathering applications. We use an online tool to do that, makes it quick and easy. Um, we don't have a very complicated application process because our grant sizes tend to be on the smaller side. Typically, we do $2,000 to $10,000 for awards. Our average last year was around 7,000. So once we have the applications, it then moves on to our review team. Our review team is made up of some of our trustees, which is our board of directors, essentially, and some community volunteers. So in addition to me reading all of them, our community volunteers are reading all of the applications. And we score them and we average the scores, and that is kind of the start of the conversation. We then meet typically in person. We try to meet in person, but today it often has to be hybrid. And we use those scores as the starting point for the conversation. And we discuss the merits of each of the applicants, what we liked, what we thought maybe some of the weaknesses were. And typically, after about an hour to an hour and a half, we've come to consensus on which applications we would like to grant funds to and which ones we're going to decline. Typically, we received dollar-wise 2.5 to 3 times more in requests than we are able to grant out.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot at a lot of organizations. So a few things there I just want to highlight for the students. One, the students have been specifically advised in their project this semester to only apply for grants under $25,000 because it does lessen the complication of the application process, right? So
Correct.
I always recommend when you're new to it and you've got the luxury to do so, to go for smaller ones first and get used to the process, because the bigger the dollar amount, the more paperwork is asked for, and it just gets really complicated. So I'm glad that you said that too. Can you go back to when you mentioned the DAF funds, the donor advised funds? Can you talk about, did those usually come from one individual? Do they come from an organization? And how do you also decide if their goals align with the mission and vision of the community foundation?
Sure. So DAFs can really vary based on who the fund holder is. We have individual fund holders. We have families that are fund holders. Sometimes it's couples, but we do also have some corporate DAFs.
Okay.
Some of the ones in the area is Abishan Hardware does their corporate grant making through us, and another one is Bemis Associates.
Mhm.
So DAFs can really range in the way that they are managed by either individuals, couples, families, or corporations. We have a values-driven philanthropy policy in place that basically says that if you recommend a grant that is not in align with our values, we do have the right to decline and say that that's not a grant that we are willing to make. Um, but it really comes down to really extreme circumstances.
Mm.
We tend to use, it's the Southern Poverty Law listing. So the organizations on that list may have questionable ethics and tend to be extremist groups that we don't want to support.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And then from at least most recently on your website, it looks like you have 5 different grant opportunities. So I imagine all of your donors align with one of those or are willing to fit in with one of those, or is it created the other way around?
The two programs are very separate. So our field of interest funds, which are the ones that we manage, really have been set up by fund holders that had a specific interest area. For example, we have one on environmental preservation and animal welfare. And you may go, those two things don't really fit together. Why they merge these together. And that's because that particular fund was started at the bequest of Ms. Doyle, and her two passions in life were animal preservation and the welfare of domestic animals. And so in her will, she left funds to us for us to manage. And so that's what we do with that fund. We have done a variety of priorities. A lot of it lately has been land conservation and habitat restoration, and we've started to dabble into how to mitigate the effects of climate change.
Mm.
But on the DAP side, it's really up to the fund holder as to where they want to direct their grants. It can be very wide ranging. They may want to support their alma mater and send an annual gift to the college that they graduated from. They may decide that they'll use their DAF to support a local organization. Or make their contribution to the United Way. And it doesn't have to stay in North Central Massachusetts. We would prefer that it does, but if they want to, say, for example, support St. Jude's Children's Hospital, we'll go ahead and forward that grant along for them.
Great, thank you. So my next question would be on the applications themselves, just because that's what these students will be working to learn. And I would say, what are some things that you always like to see on an application? And also, what are some things that make you go, immediately, I don't think this is the right fit for us?
So the things that we love to see are basically a good level of detail. For example, one of the questions that we ask is the statement of need. What issue are you addressing? And we love it when people include local data. We use that question as an opportunity to educate ourselves in what is going on, what are the trends happening in the region. Our best way to learn is from the people that are out there doing the work. So we love a good level of detail. Like, we don't need you to write a novel. I just introduced character limits. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
But that level of detail is often helpful. Another thing that we like is we ask for outcomes. So what do you anticipate kind of the benefit of the grant will be on the particular issue? We like to see numbers. Sometimes a grant writer will say, oh, well, we'll increase the number of acres of land conserved. Well, how many acres? Is it 1 acre? Is it 2 acres? Is it 250? Those numbers are important. Um, because we tend to give smaller grants and our grant period is 1 year, we like to see a variety of funding sources. And we also like to see a sustainability plan. We want to make sure that if our funding were to go away after a year, that the program isn't going to cease to exist. We like to be one of many funders, again, because a $7,000 grant for a large organization might not go very far. So we want to make sure that that program or project isn't 100% dependent on us. Because if we aren't able to fulfill that grant for a second year, we don't want to see all of that work and all of that benefit go away.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is difficult to wrap your head around when you first get into this work is how few grants will fund people versus projects, and it is for that sustainability reason. And so I'm always telling students, when you're going for grants that are realistically under like $100,000, they really shouldn't fund people unless that person has 1 year of research to do to get you to the next step, or 1 year of implementation, and then it'll float itself, because it tells the funder immediately that if this grant runs out, this program, this job runs out. And that's not usually what a smaller grant is looking to do, which is complicated. When you are reviewing applications, I imagine, particularly in this area, we're in North Central Massachusetts, you get a lot of repeat organizations and a lot of overlapping need with pretty equivalent applications. So how do you differentiate? Is it more of the points, and the person who reads it might happen to have different points? Is it more of a discussion? Is it, we gave to this organization last year, let's give to this one this year? How do you decide when things are so similar?
It's a really hard job that
Yeah.
our review team undertakes, and we really discuss it. We talk about the merits of each application. Say we're comparing two very similar applications. Some of the things that we will look at is, what is the impact that our funding is going to have? Will one of them have a greater impact over the other? Sometimes it comes down to how much was asked for. Is it something that we're even able to support? If they came in and asked for $25,000 and we're like, we don't have $25,000, we can give them five.
Mhm.
Is partially funding that request going to have the impact? Or will they have to do too much other fundraising in order to get that project or that program going?
Mhm.
So it really is a discussion. It's on the merits of the application. What is the impact going to be? If we were to partially fund it, how would that impact the outcomes?
Yeah, I've had that a few times where I've had grant funders call me and say, and even at the United Way, because obviously we both work with them a ton, say, you know, you asked for 15,000, we can really only do 8 this year. Can you get done what you need to get done? And I think there's a lot of value in saying, no, I can't use somebody else versus, yes, I can find it elsewhere, because it sets up that partnership long term to be more open. I think what a lot of people don't realize is truly how personal this process is, because you kind of click and you send your application into the void and you don't know the person reading it. But especially for these local ones, it's a really personal process by people who are part of your community. It's not as anonymous as it may seem. Uh,
No, I know almost every at least one person at every organization that we are funding, and it really is a relationship. We go beyond the application. We get an interim report and we get a final report as well. And we've also started dabbling in doing site visits,
Mhm.
which is not something that we've done before. But one of the things that's very important with establishing that relationship between the funder and the awardee is, if things are not going great, that's okay. Just
Yeah.
call us and have a conversation. Recently had one of our awardees give me a call and say, "Hey, you gave us an organizational development grant to do this, but I found another funding source
Mhm.
that will cover it, but can't cover this other project. It is outside of the scope of that grant. Can I reprogram the funds to cover this part of it instead?" I'm like, "Absolutely, we can do that." So keeping those lines of communication open even after the award is important. And it's okay if the project doesn't go the way you planned. It's better to have a conversation, and most likely we can figure out a solution together.
Yeah, especially because you may need to go back to them for funding again in a couple of years. And if that relationship wasn't there, you know, it's difficult. I've had that happen twice. I got one grant from the UMass Clinton Foundation for our food pantry. Well, 30 days after I got the grant to provide updates to our food pantry, I got a call from a TV show that came in and renovated the whole space, right? You know, so I messaged them
Mhm,
and was like, here's the thing, as opposed to 25,000, I'm getting like a $500,000 renovation, but we still need to feed people. Can I spend your money on prepackaged meals for people instead? And they were like, still same heart of it, right?
mhm.
And that was a great conversation that was really beneficial for all of us in the end. And on the flip side of it, for my housing construction project, I got a grant of $110,000 for elevator parts that was supposed to be spent about 6 months ago, but it's a $27 million construction project. There are a lot of delays. And so I just keep saying, like, here's the updates every like 60 days. And because we're
Mhm.
staying in touch, we can stretch the funds into the next fiscal year if we have to, right? So knowing there are humans that you can talk to and should talk to, I think is really helpful.
Mhm.
Okay, so my very last question for you as we wrap up here, because we're kind of talking about how personal the local foundation grants are, is if somebody is or an organization is applying to you all for the very first time and you don't know them yet, does that process look any different on your end of things? Meaning in terms of maybe investigating the organization, are they more likely to get a site visit? How do you set up that first time relationship with somebody that you don't already know?
One of the ways that I start to get to know some of our new applicants is part of our process is running information sessions.
Mm,
So I do 2 information sessions just as the application process is kicking off. And I go over what are some of the questions on the application? I explain our funding guidance. I explain the priorities. And at the end, I have time for Q&A. And so that's when a lot of the new applications or new applicants start asking questions to kind of get to know us. And it gives me an opportunity to get to know them as well. The application process itself looks very similar
mhm.
whether you're a repeat applicant or brand new to us, they're considered in the same way. The only thing that I might do differently is look at their financials a little bit more closely. For some of the organizations that we've worked with for years and years, I'll just do a quick scan of their financials. But if I'm not familiar with the organization, I might dive in a little bit more. But otherwise, once the application is approved, I will sometimes reach out and just introduce myself and let them know that I'm here over the life of the grant cycle, and if they need anything, just to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the conversation today.
No
Um,
problem.
for the class, you've got this video here that you've just watched. You see 3 discussion board questions. As always, just respond to the questions as well as to at least 2 other students and let me know if there's any words or phrases or info we gave here that you need more clarification on, and we'll get that to you too. Thank you.